Hello and welcome to video number 3. This is Grim and we're going over how to make a super easy, super cheap and safe cider. In this series of videos I will describe the very basics of fermentation and at the end describe a cheap and easy method for producing cider that will be about 6.5 to 7% alcohol by volume. Over the course of these videos we will reach this arrangement where you can have sparkling cider on tap. In the first two videos we discussed ingredients and biochemistry. In this video I'll talk about brewing a small batch. Let's talk about equipment. You'll need two pieces of equipment, a ton and an airlock. What's a ton, you ask? 2,000 pounds. Now that's ton with an O, but I digress. Although it has several meanings, in this case a ton is just the vessel in which fermentation takes place. If you hop onto eBay and do a search, you might find something like this. This stuff on the right is for an airlock, by the way. More on that later. At first blush, this nice little kit at about $15 seems to check all the boxes, and it's quite the bargain. However, I should advise that they are an absolute bitch to clean. You have to get a special brush for that, and that will cost extra. As such, I do not advise this arrangement. Airlocks. The other piece of equipment you need is an airlock. On a spaceship, the purpose of an airlock is to keep the air inside the vessel. Rather obviously, this is not a spaceship. In fact, an airlock for brewing does the opposite. It lets gas that is inside the tun escape to the outside. That keeps the tun from exploding, which is a rather handy feature. Its other very important purpose is to keep dust and bugs and other nasty things outside of the tun from getting inside the tun. Here are two typical airlocks that many brewers use. There are dozens of others that are made for various sorts of containers. But because I'm a cheap and lazy bastard, I won't be using any of them. So here's my cheap and easy solution. I use ball jars, also known as mason jars, care jars, pickling jars, or fruit jars, as shown here. Two things that are important, and this first one is super duper uber important. Did you hear that explosion? There's a reason for that. Remember during a previous video when I told you that during fermentation yeast would produce carbon dioxide. They will keep producing that gas up to some rather incredible pressures. So here's the punchline. If you have an airtight seal on a glass jar or a bottle or whatever that contains an active fermentation, you will have, in effect, a time bomb on your hands. The shrapnel will be glass. Not a good situation. Oh, and there will be a big sticky mess to clean up. This has happened to me. Don't let it happen to you. Here's how to avoid that catastrophe. Below you see the two parts that form the cap to a ball jar. On the left we have the band, and on the right we have the lid. Throw the band away or recycle it or put it in the junk drawer or whatever if you think you might do some pickling later on or something like that. Or you can give it a nice hum. Remember this guy? That's the lid. We'll use that as our airlock. More on that in just a minute. Let's talk about sanitation. Your jars must be not only sterile, but clean. For pickling jars, the easiest way to accomplish this is to put them in a dishwasher, bearing in mind the following pieces of advice. 1. Do not use soap, water softeners, or chemicals of any kind. 2. Do not have any other items in the dishwasher. 3. Run them on the hottest cycle available. And 4. Leave the jars enclosed in the dishwasher until you are ready to fill them. Which is all very good and well, I hear you say, but what if, like me, you don't have a dishwasher? So without a dishwasher, clean the jars with a freshly laundered damp rag to remove any debris. No soap. I do not use any detergents, soaps, or sanitizers of any kind. Even the tiniest bit of residue might kill the yeast or produce an off taste. Okay, now let's talk about the sterilize bit. There are 2 ways you can do this. The first is to put all of the jars into a pot, completely submerge them in water, and boil them for 20 minutes. Alternatively, you can put them in a non-preheated oven, mouth down, and bake them at 200 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 degrees Celsius for about half an hour. In either case, let the jars cool down until you can handle them with your bare, freshly washed hands. Place the jars mouth down on a paper towel or a freshly laundered rag, as shown here. And preferably this should be done just before you fill them with juice. The next step is to fill the jar with juice. There's a little more to this than meets the eye. Remember how I said that yeast produce alcohol in the absence of oxygen. If there's oxygen in the juice, then it just produces water instead of alcohol. So we want to get rid of oxygen. So to reduce oxygen, you have to pour in a special way. You want to pour so that there is a minimum of splooshing. This is not the way to fill your jar. You want to pour so that there is, as much as possible, a smooth pour. This is not ideal, but it's better. This is much better. Here we have what's called a laminar flow. Okay, some tips. Don't fill the jars completely. At most, fill 3/4 full, because sometimes there's a little bit of foam on top as the fermentation takes place, and that can overflow. As soon as the jar is filled, cover it with a lid, as shown here, but no band. Do not put a band on. Also, put them in a baking pan. Even if there is no frothy overflow, there will be a bit of drooling, for a lack of a better word, so that helps contain the mess. Now it's time to add the yeast. As mentioned, yeast are rather good at reproducing. Putting a whole packet in each jar would be wasteful and rather expensive. A packet has about 5 grams, and even half a gram would be more than enough to ferment a few cups of juice. Simply open a packet and use a knife or something similar to separate it into little groups. This is a single packet split into 8 parts. Likewise, you could also just use a simple spoon to put some yeast into each jar. What you don't use can go back into the fridge for later use. After you add the yeast, put the lids back on, but again, do not use the band. So to make an airlock, just put some small weight on top of the lid. Just use whatever is to hand. As you can see, I used a small jar of horseradish, an onion, some acetaminophen, and a plush hedgehog. So here's a pint or so of cider, just after I inoculated it with yeast. Every 24 hours for the first few days, I would give it a gentle shake. Well, maybe not that gentle. It's not like I'm serving it to James Bond. Anyway, you can see that it's fizzing after you shake it. That means that the fermentation is proceeding apace. For the last 4 or 5 days, I just let it sit so it can clarify. After a week, it's ready to drink. The cloudy bit is not harmful. In fact, it actually has some very good vitamins if you can stomach it. If not, it makes excellent fertilizer. One last tip. Yeast like to be warm, but not too warm. If you're brewing under cool conditions, you can put a heating pad underneath your jars or tons. Don't use the pads that automatically turn off after 30 minutes. That's not going to be very useful. You want it to be constantly warm. So thanks for watching. Give me a like or subscribe. In the future, I will be producing other videos on how you can produce sparkling cider on tap. So stay tuned. And thanks for watching.